First of all, thanks for waking up early. Thanks for taking the time joining us here this morning.
Thanks for having me on, Benjamin.
Has DPI ever said why this needed to be so secret? And why would anyone have to have a conversation about public schools and public school tests behind closed doors?
Yeah, you're asking the right questions, Benjamin. This morning we're going to be putting out a release, as you kind of alluded to. There's going to be a next level of this analysis. We're putting out a series of key questions for lawmakers and media. So you're really the first member of the media to start asking kind of that next level of questions. So obviously the $400,000 at the water park, not a good look for DPI, and certainly I hope people like Brian Fraley continue to dig into that. But at the end of the day, I think, Benjamin, you're really asking the most important question is, okay, when these lowering of the test scores, these cut scores occurred in 2024, the public would have wanted to know about that. And what's, I think, becoming more disturbing as we're kind of peeling back the layers of the onion here is the attendees were asked to sign NDAs. Well, those are not per se illegal, but a government entity better have a really, really good justification for why attendees would need that. And then even if there was, let's say one session where there was proprietary information, which may have been allowed, I can't imagine the entire 2-day conference was all proprietary information. And so, Benjamin, to your point, the scores were lowered. The public would have cared about that. And I think that's a critical point. If a court were to look at this, when courts look at alleged violations of the open meetings law, one of the factors is going to be, would the public, is there kind of an extra level of interest? And if there is, that government entity is going to have a really, really hard time justifying why they didn't properly notice a meeting. And so I think you're right. This is the next level of the analysis. In the event, and I'm sure you want to get to this point, but in the event, and this is where it gets interesting, a district attorney were to look at this and a court were to determine that, yes, there was a violation of the open meetings law under Chapter 19, specifically WISTAT 1997, a court can essentially unwind what happened. And so then the question becomes, if this was a workshop committee, and I'm using the air quotes there because that's the language DPI has used to describe what this group was, this 88-member workshop committee. If this was, in fact, kind of this ad hoc committee formed by DPI, and they went off into the dells without publicly noticing it, because remember, there were certainly some DPI employees there, presumably. We don't really know. But there were many school board members from across the state. They were hand-selected to form this workshop committee. If they went off to the dells, this was not properly noticed. It's conceivable that if there's a complaint made to a district attorney or the attorney general, I can't imagine this AG would do anything.
Yeah, not this attorney general, but attorney general.
Yeah, and if a district attorney looks at this and the court determines that, yes, there was an open meetings violation, it's conceivable that the decision to lower these thresholds could be reversed. This
is sort of inside baseball that guys like me who spent most of my career covering either local government or state government, it's really important. Let me make this comparison. If you've got a city council and they're going to vote to raise taxes, and they get together at the bar before the meeting, and that's when they have all the discussion. That's when they work it out. That's when they ask their questions. And then they come into the city hall, have their meeting. Nobody answers questions. Nobody asks anything. They just vote, boom, boom, boom. Well, that breaks the law. You have open meetings laws so that the discussions that impact the public happen in public. You're not allowed to make these decisions behind closed doors. And because DPI was so secret, because they took this nobody say nothing approach, they may have actually created a loophole here, because you're exactly right. When you bring 88 people together and say, all right, guys, you're now in charge of rewriting the testing scores for the state of Wisconsin, that's an official government act with people who, for lack of a better word, have been deputized by public school managers. That's something that you should invite the people in for. Look, they have the discussion on the floor of the legislature. They have all of these committee hearings, not simply because it's an exercise in yapping their gums. It's what the law requires. DPI ignored that law. How real of a chance, Jake, is it that I know if, then maybe, what do you give it, a 10% chance that somebody actually does something to unwind the law? And keep in mind, my next question is about the legislature. So this is a chance, but not a good chance, right?
Well, it's always dangerous to ask a lawyer to assign a percentage to something, Benjamin. I don't know. I think there is a good chance that, I'll put it this way, that DPI at least has a very difficult question to answer. I think this is what you're getting to, Benjamin. There's really one of two ways this plays out. DPI is going to have to answer. Either this was a formal workshop committee that they formed and then sent off sent all these members off to the Dells to make this decision essentially for DPI. If that's what it was, which is what they have publicly called it, I believe there's a press release where DPI has publicly stated this is a workshop committee. If that's in fact what it was, I don't see any court that wouldn't look at this and determine that this was in fact essentially an ad hoc committee that would be subject to the open meetings law. I mean, there's significant case law on this. Benjamin, it sounds like you're a fellow kind of sunshine law nerd. Like, at the end of the day, there's tons of case law. You reference essentially what is a walking quorum. You can't essentially decide what a government entity is going to do behind closed doors and then all of a sudden show up to a public meeting, declare this is what the government entity was going to do. Here, that didn't even happen, right? They essentially made the decision behind closed doors and then Underly announces a decision. There's no public hearing. There's nothing.
There was no opportunity for parents to come and say, hold on, wait, why do we do this? We don't know who was there yet, much less what they talked about. We don't know if there was a teacher who stood up and said, this is going to be a terrible idea. Moms, dads, school districts, nobody got to come in and talk about this. We're talking with Jake Curtis. He's with the Institute for Reforming Government. Find them online. Find them on Twitter. I'll let you hit the Twitter handle on the way out. All right. This needs to go to the legislature. No doubt about that. What are the two questions that lawmakers have to ask? What are the two questions that DPI has to answer here? And we're not even talking about the $400,000 water park. We're simply talking about, why is this so secret? And what did you talk about that parents and other educators can't hear? Are there other questions that need to be answered here?
Well, I think you've hit on a lot of them, Benjamin, and I guess I'll just quickly summarize. So, kind of like what we've been talking about, what justification does DPI have to hold this standard-setting workshop in secret? Again, either they're kind of boxed in. Either this was a formal workshop committee, in which case the open meetings law is triggered, or essentially the way that DPI framed this was dishonest, because they have publicly said this was a workshop committee. And so either this workshop committee essentially made the decision, and Superintendent Underly simply accepted that decision, or she viewed it as a recommendation or just, basically some commentary, and then she made the decision. It's got to be one or the other. And so if I'm the legislature, I ask that question. I think the second one would be, we kind of talked about this, why were workshop attendees required to consent to blanket non-disclosure agreements? Again, I don't want to bore the audience with details. There's going to be very, very limited circumstances where you can use NDAs. There are exemptions, very specific exemptions as far as when a public entity can go into closed session. That is allowed. But even there, let's say somehow conceivably everything was proprietary information. I find that hard to believe. But even if that were the case, as you know, Benjamin, you would still have to notice the fact that you're having a meeting to go into closed session to review proprietary information. So even there, DPI would have failed. So I'd be asking that question. Why did you have to use these NDAs? Was this actually proprietary information? And then, Benjamin, as you alluded to, I would ask DPI, let's make some personnel available. Superintendent Underly, DPI's Director of Office of Educational Accountability, DPI's Assistant Director of the OEA. And the actual members of these workshop committees, ask them the questions. What was actually shared with the attendees?
Yeah.
Were these PowerPoints as far as how to message the new scores? Was it focused on specific school districts? Remember, these were individual school board members. And we're asking all that. I don't have the answer. Nobody does, because nobody was there, because notice wasn't given.
This is the thing. DPI has proven that it cares about the institution and not about the kids, and this secrecy hurts the kids. Again, and if it's a recommendation, great text here on the adventknows.com talking text line. If this was just a recommendation, if this wasn't an official thing, then why did we have to spend $400,000 to take these people to a water park for a recommendation? You could have just asked for an email and done that for free. Jake, we have more, but we're out of time. I appreciate it. Go find this. This release will be coming out today. You'll probably see a lot more of it. Hopefully see a lot more of it on television stations and newspapers across the state. Jake Curtis with the Institute for Reforming Government. Thanks so very much for joining us this morning on the Benjamin Yount Show.
Thank you, Benjamin.
If you are not proud of what you're doing, you do it behind closed doors. If what you are doing is good and right and on the side of the good and the right, you have no problem shouting it from the rooftops. DPI hid this. If not for Brian Fraley and a year's worth of dogged investigative journalism, we wouldn't have known that it happened, much less what actually happened.